Hey there gardeners, Chris here. I wanted to talk about some homemade additives to your soil or to your garden or to your garden beds that are really easy to mix in and will basically take care of, potentially, some of your wastage that would otherwise go in the bin or maybe in your green bin if you're particularly environmental. And so these are things that most people would have, I would guess, at least one of. You may have two of, and it's possible you'll have three of, and I've got a bit of a bonus as well. But let's start with something that everyone should have, and that is eggshells. I guess maybe not everyone, not vegans, because they don't eat eggs. But eggshells are a great addition to the garden. I'll go into a little bit more detail on the exact benefits of each of these, but I'm going to introduce them first. And obviously there are some claims around eggshells which people argue over whether they're true. Like for instance, whether they deter pests, which I've personally found to be true. I've found they're quite good at preventing snails and slugs from getting into certain very susceptible plants. But then when I was doing my research on this, there were people saying, no, research has proven that's untrue. And I'm kind of like, well, okay, what kind of research were they doing? Because I found these quite revolutionary when I put them around a couple of plants that were otherwise just being decimated overnight. So I do kind of recommend going with an open mind, but it's just so hard to find good information online. We'll put that aside for now. And whatever you do, do not use Google AI for planting recommendations. How you ask the question will determine whether the AI tells you if it's good or bad, and that means that how you ask the question determines on whether the AI is lying to you, which I found very common. Again, maybe that's just because the information varies so greatly, but man, oh man, it was not reliable. So the other thing we have here is coffee grinds, and these have been sitting for a while. They're getting a little bit moldy, but coffee grinds, again, there's some conjecture over whether these are good or bad to add. I think the common thing people do say is they are very good in your compost, and people widely recommend putting these in. And what I didn't realize until just recently, again, doing a bit of research, is coffee is considered just green when we're talking about putting your browns and your greens into your into your compost, because obviously if you know anything about that, it's the mixture of the two that's important. So yeah, coffee, obviously quite an interesting one. There are also people who say, well, the caffeine in it can be a plant suppressant, so that could be a plus or a minus depending on what you're doing and depending on how true that is. Some people say most of the caffeine's gone after they've gone through the coffee machine. So again, lots and lots of different claims, but these are normally recommended for putting around acidic plants because the coffee itself is a little bit acidic. And then again, some people go, well, it's not really that acidic. It's not really going to change the acidity of your soil. So yeah, but you can recycle your coffee grinds quite easily, or you can probably even just go to a local cafe who just was throwing them out if they're not reusing them in some way, and you can use them. And from what I understand, even some mushrooms grow in coffee grounds, which is pretty cool. Not something I'm doing at the moment, something to think about. Point number 3, and I don't want to take this out of the pot and it will get blown by the wind if I'm not careful. I think the commercial name for this is potash, or more accurately in my case, this is just fire ash. And so obviously we're burning hardwood, we've got a fire inside during winter. We're heading into spring, we're not going to be doing much burning. In fact, there was a fire ban on yesterday because it was so hot, and we're only in the second month of spring. That's pretty regular in Australia, however. But during winter, we can save up. I've got quite a good amount here, and I've used a lot over those winter months as well, putting it in the garden for various reasons. And that is a great little addition to the garden beds because, again, potash is a good additive that can have some real benefits. Again, when I was looking at it, there were people going, put it on this, and then other advice elsewhere was going, no, whatever you do, don't put that on. So the example there, people saying put your potash on your potatoes, because some of the claims were saying, well, the potatoes need what's in the potash to go well, but then I think it was the other issue was adding that may actually cause your potatoes to get, was it potato scabs or something like that? It may actually exacerbate or encourage that to be a problem. And so again, double-edged sword. But I'm not personally sure of the truth of that. It is another cool addition that you don't need to go out and buy if you're having fires at home. Even if you're just having a fire in the garden, obviously responsibly, you can collect this stuff up. I think the important thing to note is with the potash, once it rains, it kind of gets washed away. So you're not going to be getting that out of a fire after it's rained. The other byproduct that's probably worth mentioning with fires is charcoal, and you can use that to make your own biochar or to kind of throw in your garden beds. It will absorb fertilizer, but in the long term, once it gets past that, it's quite a good addition to your garden beds because it's like quite an airy addition to your soil. So that might be worth thinking about, but that is not what we're talking about today. My secret ingredient is actually in this bowl here, and we're on rainwater only. So when we run out of water, we're out of water. And we're trying to reuse as much water as we can. And so what's in this bowl is actually the water from rinsing rice. And my rule generally that I heard previously was what you can do with your rice water. And I'm talking about I rinse the rice before we put it in the rice cooker, because otherwise you can end up with your rice cooker basically exploding from all the gluggy stuff that cooks up out of it. And I know I've heard people say this is wrong, but as soon as we started doing that, we stopped having problems with our rice cooker. And washing the rice, there's different ways of doing it. I've heard people say you just put the rice in, say, a certain amount of water and let it sit for 30 minutes. I don't do that. I normally give it a rinse, and I discard that first rinsed water because that has a lot of starch in it. And then I give it, say, 2 more rinses. I do try and limit the amount of water I use, but it still adds up. So you might end up with a litre or 2 of water for a couple of cups of rice, and wasting that is not a good idea. But the starch, I do wonder whether if you put too much of that down, could clog up your soil. The rule of thumb that I just recently found out was basically with your rice water, they didn't mention throwing any of it away. They just said put 1 cup of rice water in with 3 cups of clean fresh water, and that will basically mean that you're not putting too much starch in to your plants. And that seems like a really good rule to me. And again, they just said, you know, use it wherever if you do that, where obviously with me, I'm not putting this stuff on anything too delicate, but it sounds like it can be a good garden addition. And of course, don't always put it in the same location. So there you go. So we're gonna cut to me putting some of this stuff down, and I'm gonna talk about what my research has suggested may be good options. And again, I've done some cross-checking, but it's also possible this information is incorrect because the recommendations varied so greatly. Let's talk about the coffee grinds. They're acidic, they can inhibit seeds and seedlings apparently. They're good for blueberries, tomatoes, carrots, radishes, peppers, potatoes, eggplants, parsley and citrus, as well as hydrangeas, roses and rhododendrons in the non-edible side of things. So that just gives you a pretty good idea of where you may want to use it. And obviously there's some variants there. I've used it on blueberries because they are an acid-loving plant and that seems to work quite well. But some of those other suggestions, particularly like tomatoes and stuff, that was a bit of a surprise to me. When we go to the potash, apparently it is really good for flowering and fruiting plants, and it's got potassium in it, which is the K in NPK. So that is interesting to know. It can toughen growth against pests, which again is really, really important because pest resistance is great, and also good for the fruit that I already mentioned. And it's best used during active growth and when it's moist. And it can discourage snails and slugs when it's dry, and it's alkaline as compared to the coffee grinds themselves. So keep that in mind. Eggshells, this is mainly calcium, and so I've just scrunched them up by hands and crushed them up by hands. I haven't put them into a grinder, so they are a considerably rougher and bigger piece, and so they'll take longer to probably break down in the garden. Now apparently eggshells are good for tomatoes because they stop blossom end rot, which is quite interesting. I'm wondering whether they're also good for my squash, which is on my list of recommendations because I had a lot of issues with blossom end rot on my squash, or as we call them, what do we call them? It's just totally gone from my mind. Squash is the American name for them. We call them zucchini. So there you go. But yeah, that was a big problem for me. So hopefully my eggshells, and I might even need to grind them down a bit finer for when I'm planting them this year. We've got some seedlings coming up. That will solve that problem. I'll let you know. So also good for potatoes, cucumber, peppers, courgette, which is eggplant, marrows and squash. And marrows is, I think, what the Americans call pumpkin. I may be wrong on that one. Anyway, and it does say to avoid using your eggshells on acid-loving plants. So like our blueberries, I think the hydrangeas again, azaleas, rhododendrons, do not use it on those because they are acid-loving. Yeah, so that just gives you a little bit of a rundown of how to use these things. And yeah, hopefully that's a little bit useful.